layer of protection, a core component of our ability to place limits on who can walk around with a gun. To be clear, the Supreme Court may not be pulling the trigger, but they've just put a gun in the hands of the next mass shooter. And they have done it by ignoring the most fundamental principles of this country: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In this city, we know there's no life when violence snatches it away. We know there is no liberty at the barrel of a gun. And we know there is no pursuit of happiness when you live in constant fear of mass shootings. We're here today, not only to talk about the end of an historic law, but to announce future action to keep New Yorkers safe. The Speaker's landmark resolution lays the groundwork for keeping weapons of war off our streets. We've always had protections for our most sensitive areas. No guns at the polls, in federal buildings, or at schools. But we've left out our churches, our stadiums, public transit, and more. How can government protect their own spaces while leaving our children and families exposed to violence? We're calling on the state legislature to designate these areas as sensitive. So, in this city, we're not going to rest while conservative justices tear away our protections. Together, we're taking on the Iron Pipeline. Tomorrow, the Council's Committee on State and Federal Legislation, which I chair, and the Committee on Public Safety, chaired by Councilmember Hanks, will hear our bill responding to the flow of guns coming into our city. I am grateful to my colleagues who have committed their support to this bill to tackle the foundations of gun violence. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your consummate leadership on this issue and commitment to keeping our city safe.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. And now we'll take, we know it's a little warm in here, so we'll take a couple of on-topic questions.
Speaker Adams, given that this is just a resolution and calling on the state to establish this, have you had your legal team kind of review the possibility of this actually happening and other kind of legal ramifications that the city council can do when it actually goes to the local court?
Yeah, thank you very much, Katie. The document, I believe the legislation that came down is almost 140 pages. So our legal counsel obviously still reviewing this decision very carefully, and we are formally and proactively presenting the idea for state legislation because the threat of this decision to New York City is so very serious. We've got resolutions and we use them to help promote action by the state legislature towards solutions within its authority. And it's just as important, you know, as the council passing our own local legislation over issues that we control. Thank you.
So I haven't seen the reso, but I saw some reports on today that said any areas with 10,000 or more people on a square mile would be considered a sensitive area. The ruling from the Supreme Court specifically says you can't make an overly broad sensitive area. For example, designating the island of Manhattan as a sensitive zone. It seems like what you're proposing would do what the Supreme Court is saying you can't do. So could you explain a little bit more how those two things fit together?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. We're actually still digesting the court decision. It gave us some examples of sensitive areas, but it really wasn't exhaustive. We're urging the state to ensure that as many places where children and vulnerable populations are present, including the subway, be designated as sensitive areas. Existing state laws already prohibit legal firearms on certain premises, we know, like schools and child care centers, healthcare facilities, and our legislative resolution is calling on the state to expand the list to parks and parks department facilities, government buildings, as my colleague said, public and private education buildings, facilities, child care facilities, places of worship, cemeteries, libraries, homeless shelters, and other places. So we want that expansion. We realize the parameters of the decision for as much as we have understood the decision, but we're really, really looking towards the state to expand.
Thank you. To kind of piggyback on what Joe just said, so the legislation that you're calling for would not designate, an entire borough as a sensitive area. originally targeted locations within the borough?
Correct. We are looking towards buffer zones, and buffer zones have been recognized in other jurisdictions and were actually referenced in one of the law review articles that the court decision cited. So 1,000 feet is a suggestion in our resolution for the state, but we certainly welcome further conversation about what an appropriate buffer zone may be.
Will the legislation ask, or in your resolution, will you ask the state lawmakers to consider density as a component of this buffer zone? Or not a buffer zone, but as a designation as a sensitive area? Will there be a population density trigger that you guys are wanting?
We're still working on those details, Nolan, so we're still kind of hammering that out. Off the top of my head, I would say that density certainly would be a factor in our resolution.
I asked because the Supreme Court in ruling, as Joe said, specifically cited the District of Columbia's defense in the initial Heller decision, where they said, D.C. is a densely populated place too. We need, for all the complexities that come with a dense population, we need to be able to just have a blanket ban on handguns. And the Supreme Court said the density wasn't a defense there, and it's not a defense with the current regulatory scheme. So why do you think density would survive yet another Supreme Court challenge if you were to go?
Yeah, well, again, it's still something that we're hammering out right now. We've got our legal eagles taking a look at it for us. We wouldn't necessarily rule it out because we are really depending on those buffer zones to take up the capacity of our thought resolution.
Is the hope that the buffer zone would effectively create sort of like a citywide blanket, gun ban blanket? Is that the hope?
That's the hope. That's the thought.
Sorry, one question for Alan. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
We got resolutions and we're gonna use them.
I like that, Katie.
I appreciate it. Nice job last night at the APRC.
Yep.